Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for staying for the last event here, last session. We knew that this is our last session, so we promised that it is going to be entertaining with a lot of good numbers. So with that promise, let us get started. I go by Raj Verma. I shortened my name when I landed in US in 1999. The reason was people couldn't pronounce my name. I said, okay, I see that everybody makes the name short. There it go. R-A-J, Raj, is how I get pronounced. Sometimes it get confused for people, but I like that. So I'm a CEO and founder of Affable BPM. I come from Microsoft background. I was there for 10 years. After that, I started my consulting business, software consulting business that got acquired successfully. And after that, I'm back into the startup because I like to be close to the customer's problem. And Affable BPM does that. My co-founder, Linda Robertson, she is from North Carolina, and she was at Vidant Health for 30 plus years in CEO role. So she was very close to this problem in the back office, that how without having the automation, there are so many problems and errors. So together, I bring the technology and alliance side, being at Microsoft, as well as she brings the domain knowledge, and that complementary skills created Affable BPM. Today, I'm very happy to introduce Neil Jordan, who is on our board of advisor, and he brings more than 2 decades of experience in the healthcare as a worldwide healthcare. I would like to request him to explain his background and then take away.
Thank you. Sound. Can people hear okay? Good, fantastic. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Raj. Thank you to HFMA. It's a few years since I've done an HFMA presentation, but it is great to be here with such an important part of the healthcare ecosystem. By way of introduction, I'll just add to say I did 23 years at Microsoft, all in the healthcare space. As you can hear from my accent, I'm from the UK originally. I originally managed our relationship with the National Health Service, which is not national, in case anybody was wondering, just as fragmented as everything over here, and then moved over to the US about 18 years ago to manage Microsoft's first bit of vertical focus, which was in the provider space, and then eventually ran the provider payer and pharmaceutical life sciences business for about 10 years for Microsoft. Before, in the last 4 years, I moved over into the convergent space of retail healthcare, which was really interesting. This was all pre-COVID. It got particularly interesting when COVID happened, but working in the space of Walgreens, CVS, even Kroger, Albertsons, and other people in that space. I shouldn't say those two words so close together at the moment, Kroger and Albertsons, and the area of providing preventative care in a retail environment, which was interesting. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so. Raj asked me just to kind of set the scene a little bit around AI and healthcare. I now work on the board of, or an advisor to, a number of startups. I was fortunate enough about 9 months ago to be able to break free of the gravity of Microsoft and go off and do some other things. I'm a particular fan of Affable. Today is not a big push either for Microsoft. I don't represent them any longer, or for Affable, but I'm a big fan of them, and Raj probably will sell it way less than I do because of the focus they have on quickly delivering value around business process management in the healthcare space. Affable, as you know, means likable, quick, easy. I think it's a very, very good name for what you guys do. So let me get started. And I'll start a little bit with the center, as I see it, of the system, the patient. Now, this slide, and you're more than welcome to have these slides. I think they get distributed, and you'll see the source of all this data on the slides themselves. This slide's an interesting one. We all understand patients. We all understand how important they are to the system, and we all understand, in many ways, how dissatisfied they are, not because we are trying to dissatisfy them in any way, but because their expectation, particularly technologically, of how systems work today, has been influenced by the other industries that they're in. It was fascinating for me to move from pure healthcare, and we'll talk about data and data management in a minute, but from pure healthcare, where data management, data normalization is extremely difficult for various reasons, into the retail space. Retailers live or die on the real-time accuracy and personalization of their data. And the data sets are, yes, less complex, but still complex, but much more invested in and much more normalized. I don't think that consumers and patients understand fully why it is that the experience that they get in a healthcare environment does not match digitally the experience they get in other parts of their lives. And as I said, it's not due to lack of effort, it's because it's complex. And one of the examples we'll give you around AI is how it may well help in this space. I'll also say it's interesting that attitudes around how healthcare can get delivered, even in an industry that is as regulated for good reason as the healthcare industry is, are going to be driven by patients, particularly in the primary care, preventative care space, where the dollars go, where people choose to spend their dollars, pounds, because this is a worldwide statement, is going to get defined by more and more choice in the system. There's no two ways about it. And so the use of AI in this space is going to be, and digital technologies in general, continues to be, I would say, a major point of current underinvestment, but need for investment in the healthcare space. The expectation around a digital environment and a digital journey, if you will, from patients is much higher than what they're seeing today. And we see this everywhere. I was very fortunate, I got to work with Mayo Clinics, down to small local hospitals from the US, down to emerging economies. And everyone's struggling with doing this. And one thing I will say, and if there is one takeaway from everything I'm going to say, is it's not just about AI on its own. Everything we're going to talk about is how AI meets the human. But the expectation of how they can use that, I think, is greater than any of us really understand. And that's true across all demographics, by the way. Don't just presume that's a Gen Z, millennial type thing. Next, we understand the pressure that providers are under. Just out of interest, by show of hands, how many people are in the provider part of the industry? Okay, and do we have anyone, by show of hands, other hand perhaps, in the payer space who are here? And other folks are in the vendor space and tech space. Okay, good. We also understand that in the provider space, there are huge opportunities for AI, not for the replacement of doctors, but for the assistance of clinical staff. We understand the issues around clinical burnout. We understand how this is not just affecting people who are in the industry today and are leaving, but also those who are choosing not to join the industry because of the fact that so many of them have become, in many ways, slaves to the technology. It was interesting working in the retail space, how many of the retailers, who of course are battling for the same clinical talent as the hospitals are, it's not like they're magically creating more clinicians or nurses, were using the new systems that they were building, which typically were not built on the Epics and Cerners of this world, as a way of trying to attract staff in, to say you're going to have a new working environment, which means you're not going to be a data entry clerk. And Microsoft's recent purchase of Nuance Technologies, fairly recent, a year and a half ago now, I think it is, second biggest purchase that Microsoft has ever made, was all about really freeing the clinician up from the keyboard by using AI as a way of getting data into the system in a more natural and ambient way. So we believe that AI will have a huge impact in concert with clinicians, and that it will allow clinicians truly, at all levels, to, as far as is possible, hive off work that does not represent them working at the top of their license. And I'll give you some examples of that later. In the payer space, obviously the whole area around claims management, you saw just by the last presentation, and I sort of, in the 9 months I left Microsoft, had forgotten how complex and frankly how rote a lot of the working and the checking is in this space. And the use of AI for many years actually in this space, but perhaps not as advertised as it has been, algorithm-based AI has been really important. And I'll just, as a side note, say, when you hear people talking about AI in healthcare, there's a lot of hype, and there's actually way too much hype. We are thankfully not here to sell you on AI in healthcare. We are here to give you some thoughts about where it is today. When you're talking to people who will casually say, hey, our system uses AI, it's really important to understand the difference between AI that is model-based, that is algorithm-based, that is small model and neural network-based, which is where most of this tech was for many, many years, and the emerging technology that really came out of all of the ChatGPT world and OpenAI about 2 years ago in the area of large language models and generative AI. They have very different applications in healthcare. And anyone who kind of munges it all together and says, well, it's all AI, probably hasn't thought about it. Again, going back to Affable and some of the other startups that I'm working with, they're being very, very specific and thoughtful about exactly where they apply AI, which processes, and how that's done. And we'll talk about that later. Now, one thing it's not going to be is this picture. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the numbers next to it, but the idea that healthcare is going to get taken over, and that there will be, unmonitored robots running around delivering healthcare a la Star Wars, Star Trek, pick your science fiction. It's just not going to be the case. We fully understand that actually the optimal way of doing this is using AI in the processes with the people who are delivering healthcare today. And as you'll see this quote later on in the presentation, but my favorite quote around AI in healthcare is, the competition is not AI versus humans. The competition is humans with AI versus humans without AI. And so the real push is about how truly this technology can be assistive. A lot of the work that we did in the radiology space when I was at Microsoft was all about reducing very simple rote tasks that were taking up 90, in some cases 95% of the radiologist's time to allow them to work on the stuff that only they could answer, that no AI algorithm was ever going to be able to answer. Similarly, in the back office, this is about assisting and complementing. I actually think genius, there's lots that Microsoft has got wrong in terms of marketing, but I think a genius term that they have used over the last year and really got on top of for the last 6 months is this idea of co-pilot, the idea of the technology sitting next to you and assisting you with the work at your behest and under your control. And in fact, these big numbers really are meaningless in many ways as well, unless you are a Microsoft or a Google or an Oracle. What's really important, and the questions you want to be asking your vendors, including Affable, is what is the return to me? And how quickly can you prove that? So I'll quickly take a diversion into patient privacy for a couple of reasons. Number one, you all know how important this is. You understand that breaches are not just fiscally expensive, but they are reputationally expensive. Interestingly enough, a lot of my time when I was at Microsoft, going back 10 years now, was convincing people that the cloud was a good place to put healthcare information, even protected PHI information, not just in the US, but around the world. And of course, everyone was highly, highly resistant in a way that many people are highly resistant to AI today, until they realized that by putting it in the cloud, by aggregating the problems, they could actually get much better protection against cyber threats that they were getting. And the biggest push, I would say, that moved healthcare data into the cloud was the use of the technology to protect against privacy breaches. The other thing to think about here is around ethics. As you think about how AI is going to work inside your organizations, you do need to think about governance. You do need to think about how it's going to be used to help you monitor privacy of data and how you're going to reuse that data or not reuse that data. But you also need to think about if you're writing your own code in this space or if you're a vendor in this space, how do you ensure that the AI that you're creating is inclusive, that you're not accidentally putting in bias into the algorithms that you're writing or the models that you're creating that you're not aware of that creates bias against, not necessarily against, but for particular groups or towards particular diagnoses. You've got to be very, very careful about that. So think about the ethics around that. And you'll see later, I think on one of Raj's slides, a a framework that Microsoft has put together. Now, I don't necessarily think Microsoft has the ownership of all IP around this space, but obviously they've been doing a lot of work, and a lot of their valuation, their jump in their valuation has been down to their focus in the AI space. So let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases. I think you can hopefully read it from where you are. Again, we will leave these slides. So, number one point I said right at the beginning was it's not about AI replacing humans, it's about AI complementing and assisting. Again, think of that co-pilot term. My second thing that I'd love you to think about and retain is that AI is not all about the clinical space. There will be great jumps forward in the clinical space, drug discovery, radiology, many, many, many spaces. But think about how it's going to work in the back office processes. You'll see some of them listed up here. This may well be where actually the largest derivation of value of AI is going to be in the healthcare space, and even in the IT back office processes. What do I mean by that? I mean the use of artificial intelligence for data normalization. Today, data, as I said, in healthcare is very non-normalized, meaning it's not all nicely regimented, nicely organized. It doesn't even necessarily use the same language types, despite all of the standardization that has been attempted over the last 9 to 10 years. But AI can really, really, really help in this space. So, to give you a couple of quick examples of where I've enjoyed seeing it be successful, certainly towards the latter of my years at Microsoft, COVID was a great example where we were challenged. We were challenged just by the sheer volume of people that needed to be listened to, diagnosed, and triaged. This was a classic case where even pre the large language models, the generative AI that's around today, we could use algorithm-based AI to very quickly understand where people were in terms of initially diagnosis, secondarily viability and access to shots for COVID and so forth, saving human beings large amounts of time and enabling them to concentrate on things that they were more suited for doing. I also think the area of predicting care. If I have one bugbear with the healthcare system today, it is around prediction, and it's around the technology that we're not using yet today to understand and predict exacerbations, particularly for those who are chronically ill. And it's very clear that if we bring data not just from the clinical world, but also from the non-clinical world, behavioral world, even from the retail world, we can start driving much better adherence and much better prediction. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Raj, who's going to talk to you a little bit more in more depth, and then we're going to leave some time. I kind of meant to ask whether there are any questions at the beginning, which is a good time to ask, but we do want to leave some time for some questions, so do start calculating those.
Thank you so much, Neil, for sharing how, what is happening, where it is going, and I think that is very, very important as where we stand today, and how we want to use the AI for the ecosystem, which is one of the largest ecosystem, and we are all part of it. It's been really great, like what we are hearing since morning. It was a great like a speech from Sean talking about claim processing, right? The denials. As we see that this data is increasing every single day. One patient creates 1 gigabytes of data every visit. The providers are creating petabytes of data every year. The huge data, what is being created, how we use that, and that is also creating the huge cost that we all know here in the room. You guys are veteran of that. We know that. And then, of course, it is causing a lot of those breaches that you saw some numbers when Neil shared that slide. Using this advanced technology of AI is going to transform these things. We know that. The question is not about when can I use that? It is about how I can use that, and then what kind of measures I can take it. So leveraging this technology is also very important from the perspective of how the patient care is been at the center of everything by using the usage of proper data. We all heard the whole day today that adopting AI is very challenging, and we are aware of that because we are part of this ecosystem. And there are data complexities, there are technical and skill gaps, there are security and compliances. We heard the panel talking many of their fears today, why they will think twice before doing anything related to AI. But that was also very important to see that these challenges are good because the reason is you are aware of your data, you are aware of your processes, and you are aware of the repetitive task which is happening no matter which functional area that you are going to touch in this particular ecosystem. When Dennis talked this morning, after his keynote, I asked him, Dennis, are you considering taking all the functional area of Mayo Clinic and ready to find the repetitive task and letting us, the AI, to really go after each one of those functional area and see what kind of repetition of the task are happening? He said, maybe, but we will start from the back end. Small things, small processes, where the back office is where we have the particular, that particular domain where we know that the processes are there, there is a repetition of tasks. We have to start somewhere, so those will be the small steps will be taken. And I totally agree with that because the challenges are no simple. The technical gap is another big thing because when we had the panel discussing about people are scared of AI because of the fictional movies that what we have seen. AI is not that. Since we see the car, right, which is going to drive by itself, what I have heard recently that you take, and that is truth, you take that model, that automated car is driving on the road, and you put that on the bike, it won't work. The reason is it is very, very specific use case when you are taking your data, applying the AI on that, and trying to find inferring the value of your business. Very important to remember. What that means is, from the technical gaps is, do we have the resources who are looking at this particular problem in a way so that we know what we are doing? And they talked about partnerships with vendors and having that transparency, very important. And there is where the next problem about the compliance and security, because we know when we are touching the data, we are touching our lives. Nobody wants that AI model to go out and let your history to be read by ChatGPT. Nobody wants that. And it is understood by when we are creating that model, how to safeguard those models so that you can have that particular model only for your use case for your data. Of course, there are strategic approaches to be taken by each one of us as a part of this ecosystem. And on the data complexities, it is important to understand different kinds of approaches. As you can see on the slide, I'm not going to read all of that, but these are all very important strategic approaches, engagement that you need to keep in mind every time you decide, okay, how can I bring this automation all AI piece in my organization? Siloed data creates a lot of problem. We know that. Now, the data to curate and then have that curated data to allow you to do certain things on top of that, it takes time. We heard from one of the panelists saying that if they have done for one pair, if the AI has been utilized and automation is done for one pair, the remaining 20 pairs, we need to continue to do that work because the same model is not working for the other pair because of the non-consistency into the data. And Sean made a very good point at that time saying that we do not want to see that immediately there is going to be the gratification. The upstream and downstream value need to be counted as you start looking at these data complexities. It's not an overnight solution. It is not. There is a work involved It is not 1 day, 2 day, it is a years of the work need to be put into this in order to really look at these data complexities, but we need to be aware. And awareness is what helps us to be intentional to really take care of these things. And then of course, in the technical and skills gap, having the right people employed, given the training so that they can ask the right questions and make sure that when you are going, trying to take any kind of models, how that is going to cost you, what is it going to do for your data, is it going to talk to the other data, and all that, right? On the compliance and security, 10 years back, things were different. Things are changing every year. The big part of threat analytics is a piece where you can depend on certain things. But does that mean threats are not going to happen? The breaches are not going to happen? No. The part what we need to see that, and panelists were also agreeing to that part, that it is when, right? Are we ready to take those threats and have the proper monitoring done so that we are ready and we know our fallback plan? All these different approaches are going to help all of us as we start adopting AI. The enterprises have money, so they are able to do these approaches or these engagements in a different way. What about the small and mid-size providers? What about small and mid-size payers or the claim processing units? The way I look at this particular approach, in my mind, that once these solutions start getting into the market for the enterprise customers, there are going to be small language models which will start helping the small to mid-sized customers also. The reason is we have to look at the cost, because the ROI is one of the very important factor that we all care, and we need to definitely look at that while we decide to take this kind of approaches. Everybody says that AI has a very high cost impact. I agree to that, but how? Under each one of these categories, there is a reason for that cost, because our data is not cleaned, because there is a technical gap, because the security need to be decided in certain fashion when we try to attach the AI for any type of solution. There is a short-term investment needs to happen from all of us in this ecosystem in order to solve this problem and have the long-term benefits with the efficiency, with the productivity gain, as well as reducing these repetitive tasks, so the staff, the people will be able to do more creative work. As Neil was mentioning, Microsoft is not the only leader who is defining this kind of responsible AI type of principles. There are other giants too who are also contributing in this space. And one thing to really note that the inclusivity as well as having the unbiasedness for that fairness, under the fairness, is very important, along with these other areas. What does this tell us? If the giant, if the leader like Microsoft is defining these principles, what do we learn from that? Because when they define this, they are taking the stance. They are spending millions of dollars to create this kind of models so that others can take the benefit out of that. And it, again, not just the Microsoft today. There are others who are also talking a lot about responsible AI. And responsible AI is not the only responsibility of these big leaders. It is responsibility of all of us, because we are part of this ecosystem. And that is very important to understand from the get-go, so that we take those approaches and we make sure that where is my data going to be? How I'm going to curate this data? How long this is going to take for me to curate this data so that I can infer this kind of business value? And then nevertheless, the security part need to be addressed. But because the breaches are going to happen, is that vendor, is that partner, or is that like your resources are ready to do that BCDR, business continuity disaster recovery, handling properly so that you do not have the downtime? We all discuss about how AI is going to help patients as well as the clinicians and pharmaceutical companies and all that. The back office has been ignored for years. There is no digital transformation into the back office. We all agree to that. we have seen 99% labor cost is mainly happening, and out of that, a big percentage is because of the back office. So we would like to discuss today that how the data curation and unification, as well as the claim and back office processing automation over there, and how to bring the predictive analytics out of that. The reason for this topic is because we see that and we face that every day. So how about we, because this is a collective effort, how about we really look at that, how this is going to impact us. The claim management using AI, you saw in the morning when Sean was presenting the number, it's a huge cost. Who is paying that money? We all are paying that money. It is going out of our pocket in some or other way. This $260 billion cost for the claim processing is not a small cost. Can we just remove this particular area and say that it is solved? We cannot, because we are at the midst of that problem, and we need to think about how effectively we should see the small wins as well as look at the big picture and know we are traveling to that big picture to achieve this kind of 85% of the efficiencies that others are doing. Sean's point was like so in place, Sean, that there are many who are doing this kind of work, but is that affordable? When we are the small organization, when we are the mid-sized organization, is that affordable for us? Answer is no. Today, no, it is not affordable. How can we make it affordable? And there is where we need to be looking at the different solutions and ready for some experimentation. I was talking to Michael, and he likes to use this experimentation word, and I like that, and I tell him that, well, in our space, we call this as a proof of concepts. Look at your partners who you are working with and see if they are ready to do some proof of concepts for you to bring small efficiency which can prove that this is possible. Data curation and claims automation, there are many examples. We heard some examples throughout the day today. So I'm not going to take too much time on this slide, but definitely there is a big opportunity. Having the handwritten claims written, how to process them through your system. There are solutions, there are natural language processing, there are image recognition available today, and those are not expensive. Those are pretty affordable solutions available into the market today that can be taken into the considerations while you are doing handwritten prescription data so that we can reduce that repetitive task. And of course, it's going to bring a lot of business value, business insights for your organization so that you can decide which way to sail the ship. I would like to talk a little bit about Affable BPM. We are in the back process. We are automating the back process in a way that today I was explaining to Fred, and I was asking him very simple questions. I said, do you have Excel sheets? He said, yes. Do you have files attached into the email? Yes. Do you have the data or the files sitting somewhere into OneDrive or Google Docs? He said, yes. I said, okay, great. How do you send the emails? How do you sign your contracts? And he provided the answer for that through the email, through the DocuSign. I said, okay, I want this report. From the unscattered data, you cannot pull the report. We all know that. There is where we come into the picture. We have very few customers today. They are all paid customers, about 19 customers, and we have ran the survey on them to figure it out what is the real ROI. By having the solution for very competitive pricing, what is the ROI they are getting? And for they are saving per customer, we figured out these numbers, $40,000 for non-printing papers, basically. The ink and the paper is saving them $40,000 per organization, per department. More than $500,000 for not paying the fines, because now they have the workflow which is giving them notifications and ticklers to know that when to renew. $1.5 million for the productivity. The reason is when they start using the solution, they said that 60 to 70% of the productivity increase of their users. And the example is very clear. They used to take that contract to go from point A to point B, and it used to take 140 to 160 days. Now it takes 15 to 30 days. Very clear ROI for them. Now they start using the solution. Of course, they don't want to change to anything else because we also provided them how they can create other standard operating processes within the solution on the fly without using the developer. That is how you are going to reduce the cost of the solution so that the business user can take that effort in order to create their own processes into the solution. And there is a very clear before and after facts that what we are showing here. And while showing these facts, we have also realized that we are saving them all these papers, which is causing a great alignment with the carbon footprint around the UN SDG goals. Because we have saved them more than 70 million pages, which equates to more than 45 tons of paper, that has been preserving many trees and like thousands of liters of oil and water. And then, of course, so many users are using the system today, even though it is such a small set of customer. We see the impact. And that's what I love about. I could go back to Microsoft, and I can work on very complex system. But that is not what I love. I want to wake up to see that how I'm impacting these small customers because they see this value on everyday basis. And today, because they trust the system, we are running more than $25 billion of live contract into the system. And of course, these numbers were very impressive. So we got selected and recognized by Microsoft. And another thing that Microsoft, the way we are doing this solution for our customers, Microsoft has also invested into the company. And we are very proud of that. So I do want to live with this kind of quick notes to you guys. This is just the beginning. The things which we have not seen with the digital transformation, we are going to see that with AI. And from that perspective, it is really just the beginning. Paul Hudson, he's a good friend of Neil, and I saw this TED Talk where he said that how AI eliminates unglamorous work and speed up the operation while collaboration across competitors can dramatically boost sustainability. And he gave a very good example saying that the patient with diabetes produces 48 tons of carbon footprint for the lifetime, wherein non-diabetic patient is 18 tons of carbon footprint. Sure, there is a big sustainability impact that what we see, but how do we help that patient is what he's talking about. And that was all possible because Sanofi is taking the approach to have the AI from get-go. All his 20,000 people uses AI in some shapes and form every month. And 9,000 people use AI every single day in, again, some shapes and form with the small use cases, with the small problem to be defined and really focusing on those things. Another VP at Cisco mentioned that there will be two types of companies. One which is doing AI forward thinking and one will be irrelevant. We all need to really think about that. How do I look myself after 5 years and 10 years? And then there is another great quote that Neil already mentioned about this, that AI won't replace humans. Absolutely not. The sci-fi movies are not true because we see these models every day as a part of being coming in from the technology background and all that. But humans with AI will definitely replace human without AI. And that was the article came into the Harvard scholars. And it was really interesting to talk about different kinds of these researchers are working and trying to see that how AI is going to help for the better good for us, actually. So the human smarts and machine smarts together collectively can create a bigger smarts for all of us. Are we ready? Thank you so much. More than happy to take the questions. Any fears, anything that you think you would like to see as a part of your organization and you have like fears. We would love to discuss that.
Observations so far, where do you see, let me back up, small wins, build, big wins, right? Okay. So from two people that have been looking at the industry from the outside and somewhat from the inside, with where do you see things that you feel would be the first steps from the hospital perspective or from the insurance perspective that would benefit both of us?
Steve?
Yeah, I'll start. And this is a slightly contrary answer. So yes, and I think the approach of small wins and gaining confidence that way is absolutely vital. Seeking out processes that are ripe and putting AI into the process flow as it already exists is the most important rule as far as I'm concerned. I can't define what those processes are for you. A business process consultant would do that much better than I can. We've talked about claims management. I've talked about data ingestion. There's some clinical processes as well. And at the same time, with doing the small pieces, rallying the organization at a structural level to put in the governance and, frankly, the education around AI in a way that didn't happen, frankly, around data in a way that it should have happened. I'm always, particularly in the provider space, but this is also true in the payer space, surprised how uncontrolled and unnormalized the data estate is in these organizations, in almost all of them, to be honest with you. And so at the same time that you kind of play at one end, which is you find processes, you get vendors like Affle and other vendors in specific process areas that already exist, and get it injected into those processes is number one. But at the same time, put in place the governance that's needed around the usage, management, ethical usage of it, and very importantly, education. People are scared, and people kind of need to play in a safe sandbox way where they're discovering it, because it's a set of tooling which is available to everybody at every stage of the career that they're in and can be very easy to use.
My question is, everybody's talking about how you can adapt, how AI can take your current data and your current systems and improve them. How far are we away from the AI system, AI actually designing the system and we migrating to it?
I can give some thoughts if you want to as well. At a small level, not far at all. It's really, I got to have lunch with, just as I was leaving Microsoft, actually someone who's very senior in the research organization. And this was just before the sort of ChatGPT explosion that happened. And this is an individual who is not in any way given to hyperbole at all. And we sat and we had lunch, and I'm like, so is this as big? Is it really as big? And he says, yes. And the area where it's biggest, not only yes, and the slightly frightening phrase of, and we don't quite understand how the systems and the models are getting so much better, so much faster, which scared me a little bit, but we went then into, there is an off switch, right? And yes, there is an off switch. But the real area where he felt the largest area of improvement was in the systems coding space, and the ability to, we're not there yet, but to kind of verbally say, I want a system that does X, Y, and Z. Now, that will be part of the story that you talked about. So AI will invent itself to a certain extent, will invent those systems, but the control that you have over that and the boundaries that you have over that goes back to the point around governance up front. So AI for self-creation of coding is already in place, is already part of the game, actually.
Just to add to that, today when we are writing the code, we do use the Microsoft OpenAI services to really have our developers to do the 1 month of job within 2 weeks, for example. There was another very interesting podcast I was listening from Bill Gates where he was interviewing Altman, OpenAI's founder, and same question was asked. And this is Bill Gates' Unconfuse Me podcast, where he asked this question to Altman, saying that what is that area? And as Neil mentioned, coding is going to be the first area to get really advanced very fast. And the biggest reason behind that is because it's a programming language. There are set of rules, and those set of rules feeding to these very large language models much easier compared to giving the unstructured data. What we discussed today, the problems are the data complexities because the data is very unstructured. But the programming languages are super structured, and they have a very structured rules. That's why AI can do that much faster than we can imagine today.
And I would say in healthcare, to add to your point, given naturally the state of the data, right, the sort of there is structural data, of course, but the amount of unstructured data as well in the healthcare space. I would go back to, the first place to apply it in healthcare is actually getting meaning out of data and normalizing data and helping data come together. Even a task like, probabilistically matching Neil Jordan, who goes to Providence, with Neil Jordan, who goes to Evergreen, with Neil Jordan, who goes to Forward Healthcare in the Bellevue Mall. Being able to probabilistically match that in a way that just wasn't possible before. It used to be horribly human-centric in terms of how they would do that is really important. And just getting data, if there's a rallying cry, it's like getting the data in order so that it's ready. If the data is not in order and you put AI over it, you won't get great insights out of it, basically.
Can you talk about process mining with reference to In continuation to that, can you talk about process mining and where does it play the role?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I will say, an expert on process mining in healthcare. I will say generically the ability of AI to learn and create process, excuse my English, graphs. You understand the term graph, right? Not in the old mathematical sense of graph, but the big data sense of a graph, of understanding where data is being used, how it's being used, how it's traveling around the organization. In that sense, sort of the self-creation of those processes is already getting relatively advanced. And I know a lot of the management consultants, some of them are hopping on it and saying this is a great thing and we should use it, and some of them are saying this is very, very scary. And I'll, back to the jobs piece and the people piece. And again, Paul Hudson in that same TED talk, he's very clear. He says, it's not like things aren't going to change. Jobs are going to change. There's no two ways about it. And back to your question about, can the AI actually help the retooling of people? Yes, it can when it's used right. And people, I think, those with an open mind to it can get, it's not even a question of retrained. It's like they can get access to new things, new tools, and in some ways new toys in a way that's actually not been available in 20 or 30 years in the technological space. And so in the back to your process mapping question, I think that will affect directly how those processes change. I know this from the Microsoft perspective. Teams as a canvas for human collaboration inside the organization. Everyone was like, "Oh, it's a video conferencing system." No, it's a platform and a tool for human collaboration. And one of the great joys about it when it gets deployed at an enterprise level is it starts to understand who's talking to who and about what, with their permission, to be clear. And you can then start getting much better knowledge and process flows out of it.
So when we looked at the process mining with UF Healthcare, what they were mentioning that, okay, you have our contract management, you have our maintenance management workflows, we want to know, so this is again specific, right? We have to constantly think about what is that specific use case. So they mentioned their use case that these are two processes running on their own. We want to know that when we are signing these contracts with Philips to get all these ultrasound machines and other equipments, but then we have the maintenance contract separately, can you join these two processes? Can you do the mining of these two processes to figure it out that are we paying more? Where can we save? And where are the real problems are there as a part of the maintenance? If these processes are sitting separate into their system and they are not talking, we can't find that. And there is where we use AI. And we are in the conversation to do that very small use case with the real-time customers to talk about these two separate processes, but there is some commonalities that we find out, we discuss their business problem because they want to report the number that where can I save my cost on the maintenance or buying the equipments, and there is where the process mining can play the big role. We are at the very small scale, by the way, and what Neil mentioned, he's talking about the very big scale related to process mapping and mining. But even at the small scale, there are things that can be done.
So I don't know if this is too weird a question, but you put up those guidelines, ethical guidelines from Microsoft, and I was reminded of Asimov's robotic laws, right? But as they talk about liability, where does that liability sit, right? Is everyone who's using generative AI then responsible for the product that half came from, a system that did half the code, and half from me? Am I responsible for that whole product? How do you figure out who's liable, who's responsible?
Great question. I think there are two answers. There's a process-specific answer to that, which I think is between the vendor and the organization. And I think you can get quite granular and angular about, we are going to look at this amount of data. We are going to take these responsibilities on both sides for that, and therefore there will be legal ramifications against that. And I think in the same way that drug interactions and the systems that manage that have specific clauses around that, very, 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 very similar. I think at a broader level, there's a lot of work to be done to define it, to be honest with you. I can't give you the answer that just says, hey, it's all Microsoft's responsibility or Google's responsibility, because it is too complex. But I know the organizations are building, as they did actually with the shift of data to the cloud, they're building a framework of responsibility, of basically saying, hey, look, it's our responsibility to do these things and not do these things. And it's your responsibility to do these things and not those things. And then, I know, and I'm sure this is the case for many of the AI companies, but there are pretty strict internal ethical committees that go into, all right, what are we going to build and what are we not going to build? And who are we going to build it with and who are we not going to build with it? And of course, there are regulations around that. And the big tech companies have been actually pushing the government in the US, and the same has been happening across many other countries, to say, we want to see regulations around this. We do not want this to be an unregulated or dysregulated space. Those questions, unfortunately, the answers to them are not as clean as they can be yet, as they need to be yet.
Yeah. I'm going to throw back the different question at you on the same lines that social media was the internet brought us the information so fast that we became global citizen with the one click. AI is going to bring that cognitive power to us. Whatever happened in the social media, whatever happened with the good and bads, who is liable? And there is where I think, to Neil's point, being the responsible AI utilization, it's not the overnight solution. It's going to take time, but we all are part of this. So when we say the liability thing, it's going to unfold as we see the time comes.
Just out of interest, can I ask a question back? How many, by show of hands, how many people in the room have either a ChatGPT or a DALL-E account? Okay, that's great. So
Good
people are
number.
definitely, lots of adoption. Great.
While using the ChatGPT, do you have a fear that whatever you are typing, whatever questions you are asking, it's going to get exposed? Whoever is using ChatGPT, you do? What is the biggest fear when you use the ChatGPT?
I'll be put on the list.
Yeah.
Very specific questions about international topics, for example.
You think that you'll be put on the list
Do you-
because of the Terminator movie?
my question is, do you imagine that you're not already on the list? No, and I don't really mean that jokingly. I think what this has surfaced, which has been, it's been remarkable in how little it's been surfaced actually in the past, is that all the work that was behind, the huge expansion of personalized ad creation, third-party cookies and all that stuff, which obviously is changing this year, already, the amount of data that is known about you and is known about what you've been typing into pre-ChatGPT systems is already mind-blowingly large, and to a certain extent, I would say people have given away privacy, but certainly people have, to a certain extent, not turned a blind eye, but they've done the deal, which says, you know what, if things do get meaningfully more personalized for me, and I get information that I want curated in a good way and in a neutral way, it's actually okay to be on the list. What I don't want is to be unknowingly on the list.